a very special episode of Stop the Lights with Olivia and Ciarán, where we are going to discuss the 7th season of Drive to Survive, which is landing on Netflix on March 7th. So if you're listening to this before then this is a little preview for you. If you're listening to this after the episodes drop on Netflix, then this is going to be a little post-season recap kind of discussion. Before we get into it, let's listen to a clip.
This sport is tough.
You cannot underestimate the mental pressure.
You have all the eyes on you from the outside.
Nothing to see here.
We are the Kardashians of Formula One.
I look perfect. Any team needs total unity.
After 12 years together, Lewis tells me I'm going to Ferrari. Really?
Good for Lewis, good for his bank account.
Oh, it has us all very, very excited because, of course, we still don't really have cars on track. Yes, we've had the Bahrain testing, but up until now, we haven't really had much else. Ciarán, are you excited?
I am excited, first of all, to get cars back on track in Melbourne in Australia, first race of 2025. But Drive to Survive has whetted my appetite so much. 10 episodes of Drive to Survive in season 7. We're 7 seasons in.
Seasons. Like, when this first started, I couldn't believe my luck that finally we had like a something mainstream for Formula One, because at the time it still actually wasn't very mainstream. It was still kind of like just on the outskirts. It's really brought it to the forefront of global sport, and as much as I do give out about some of the Drive to Survive blow-ins that try and correct me on factual things that, well, I've been following the sport for many years. I would like to think that I would know more than someone who has just watched 3 episodes of season 4. But
who is that person? I mean, there's a name there. Oh wow. Tell me later.
Subscribe to our Patreon that doesn't exist to find out more. But I do think that it has done wonders for it, to the point that like it's so much more accessible now.
Yeah, it is. And you know what? It's worked for Formula One. It has brought in a whole slew of fans now, though, to be fair, and it's worked for Netflix. And then Netflix bringing in WWE to their platform, which means that they're kind of doing live sports entertainment. You know, they kind of said we're not going to do sports, but they're going to do sports entertainment and live stuff. So I would not be surprised if Netflix bid for some sort of Formula One rights, whether that's in the US, whether that's international, I don't know. But I'd say that is coming down the line at some point.
Yeah, and actually they were talking about it on the Oscars red carpet, that they're also going to try and put a bid in to steal the live stream from Disney, which, considering they already have the SAG Awards and that runs so smoothly, like you kind of go, yeah, do you know what? That might be the way forward for a global kind of engagement point of view. But we had been hypothesizing as to like what was actually going to be included this season, because so much had happened last year in the 2024 season.
Are you going to brag already? Are you going to brag yet?
No, not yet. I'm going to save that for later. Save the brag for later. Look, unsurprisingly, they opened with the massive Lewis shocker, which the way that they actually depicted it, I thought it was really interesting that there is a moment where it looks like this really awkward encounter between Lewis and Toto, and it's kind of made to look like that was their first encounter since the news dropped. But I would highly doubt, considering the timeline of everything, that of what they're showing, that was actually the first time they'd seen each other.
There's no way. There's no way that Toto Wolff allows that first interaction to be filmed by Netflix. There's absolutely no way in the world. Look, they were always going to start off with Lewis going to Ferrari, because that is the casual fan wants to know that information anyway. I actually enjoyed the way they depicted it, though.
Yeah,
wasn't the worst for me. I liked how
they didn't need to dramatize it. It was already dramatic enough.
I liked, though, how like the other drivers being jealous and then taking the mick out of Lewis as well. It just comes across so well. Now, I'm going to say this later on, but the real the drivers, the 20 drivers, and then the extra people who come in, the other drivers, a real sense of brotherhood actually comes across in this series for me. They might fight each other on track. They might flip off each other on track and get in trouble for it later on. Spoiler for Liam Lawson and people down the line. But there's a real sense of brotherhood. They want to protect each other. Actually, that race in Brazil, not to skip too far ahead, several of the drivers commented on the radio, we're going to die. We're in serious trouble here. So like you do get a good sense of camaraderie and brotherhood and sportsmanship as well, to be fair. And that really comes across in Drive to Survive.
Yeah, and I really loved when Lewis was kind of slagging off the livery of the car last year, and then they were like, oh, we should do like a Lewis special, and you can like pick one of the races. And George then goes, no, we're going to use it for next year's car, and then when you're driving behind us, you can look at it. That, for me, was the funniest thing. And then Lewis was like, I'm going to have to put up with this all year. But that's the thing, like, for when it actually happened and when it was announced, like, as Will Buxton says in the series, that's going to be a long divorce. And
Yes.
it is. You don't really, like, you see it maybe like halfway through a season. You never hear about it like over the winter season. So I think that's why I think that's another reason why it was so shocking at the time.
You've said that far quicker than Will Buxton says it. That's going to be a long divorce. Mother of God. The reason some of the episodes are so long is because there's so much Will Buxton.
I love Will Buxton, and the thing is, this season he's like the chains are off. He is like going for it. Some of the shade that comes out of that man's mouth is
true.
brilliant.
It's true.
I loved it.
Actually, Lewis Hamilton comes across quite well in that first episode.
Yeah, he
you
does.
don't see a lot of him, but what you do see is he comes across very well.
He does, and I think one of the most interesting things that I think is a clue as to why Lewis decided to go to Ferrari is that moment where he and Sainz are talking during the press conference. Now, I don't remember seeing anybody discussing them chatting during that conference, and I'm like, clearly nobody else picked up on this. So this is technically a Netflix exclusive of what they discussed. And Lewis blatantly just sort of says, I don't see Mercedes ever winning a race again. Now, this was of course before the first race of last year, and he went on to win 2 races.
Silverstone was far away at this point. At least from Lewis's mind, yeah.
So I think it's kind of interesting from that perspective that that's kind of where his head was at. So yeah, it makes sense that Fred Vasseur swooped in, offered him a bag of money, and he went, sure, why not?
Do you think Toto said, look, we're going to have a decent car, maybe 2 or 3 years, hang on? And Lewis was like, I don't know whether I have 2 or 3 years left.
Yeah, you'd kind of wonder that. And I think even when Toto is then talking with Susie about like who to get in to replace, when he suggests Alonso in her face, she's just like, if you're looking towards the future, like he'd only really be a placeholder contract. He wouldn't be like moving into like the next stage of Formula One with him. And I think, maybe that's where the thought process is with Lewis as well. Maybe he is kind of like, I'm going to finish out my career in Ferrari and just give it a bash, and then at least I can say I drove for Ferrari.
Yeah, 100%.
Speaking of when Toto and Susie were chatting, did you hear his Max Verstappen comment?
Go on, remind me of it, because he's on the balcony and I've forgotten exactly what he says about Max.
Basically, when they're talking about like who potentially could take Lewis's seat, she was like, is Max an option? He was just like, well, I had promised Lewis that I wouldn't, but now I can. And it's an interesting comment. It's like, when would that conversation have happened? Was it when Bottas was being swapped out before Russell went in? Was that when Lewis went, as long as you don't put Max in the car with me, then we're grand? Was that when that would have happened?
Unless it happened way, way before then. Maybe even before Max won his first World Championship.
Maybe.
But see, we're never going to know that. We need someone to ask Toto Wolff that question, actually.
Maybe I need to get my press pass out.
Get your press pass out. Go to one of those very tetchy press conferences, as we learn in Drive to Survive, actually. Lando Norris, I think, was going to brain someone at one point. The same with Max Verstappen, saying he doesn't need to be asked the same question every single press conference. You're going,
no,
Max.
that was Lando.
Was that Lando?
Lando said that.
Yes.
Max was the one just sort of being like, when they were pressing him to be like, are you moving to Mercedes?
Yeah.
And he was just like, well, I keep talking about like what we're doing with the car for next year, so that should tell you all you need to know. And then one guy just turned around and he goes, just a simple yes or no there, Max, please. And he was just like, oh, okay, then yes, like I'm driving for Red Bull next year. Like, and you could see the look on his face. He's like, did I not just answer that question? And it's like, yeah, you did, but they need an exact line. And even, we'll get into it later on, there's an interview with Christian Horner, and the journalist is really pushing to get a certain turn of phrase out of him, and it kind of makes me uncomfortable as a journalist. It's like, you really shouldn't be putting words in the people's mouths. It's like, if this is what they're saying, yes, you know what they're implying, and even if you put it to print, it's still going to be very clear as to what they're implying. Because she wanted him to say, I'm innocent of all suspected whatever, but he wouldn't use the word I'm innocent. He was just like, it's all like under investigation, I've been cleared of all thingies. And she was like, so you're innocent then? So that always, I'm like, I understand it from the journalist perspective, but I also understand that, like, you know, you really should not be putting words in other people's mouths. And so with a show like this, I think there would have been an opportunity if Lewis had actually been taking part, because the only time we see him in the chair is actually from season 6 when he's just like, oh no, I'm driving for Mercedes. 6 weeks later, oh, Lewis is driving for Ferrari.
You get that little breaking thing from Twitter coming
Yeah.
up. Yeah.
And I think if they'd had the opportunity, they could have followed up if Lewis had been in the chair, they could have followed up on what Toto said, to be like, oh, so you didn't want to be teammates with Max. That would have been a perfect opportunity to do it.
Shall we talk about, you mentioned Christian Horner and his the kind of trouble that he was in.
Hornergate.
Yes, Hornergate. What a horrible name.
Isn't it? But you know what? It kind of works.
Shall we talk about his, what appears to be very, very, and I didn't realize it was this tetchy, his relationship with Zach of McLaren. It is, the two of them do not like each other. And I don't think it's just in a sporting sense.
No, and like, I think now whether this again has been dramatized for television, I don't think it has, because I do remember Zach being very, very vocal and being one of the most vocal of all of the team principals with regards to Christian. There was a load of allegations launched against him, and Red Bull were being a bit cagey as to what these allegations entailed. They were doing their own internal investigation, and Zach just basically kept giving interviews, or at least when he was asked the question, he would answer it. There was a moment when like all the other team principals are sitting there really uncomfortably after being asked a question about it, and none of them say anything. And then later on, another question is posed, and Zach is the one that answers, and he sort of says like, oh, I just hope that like once it is all concluded that Red Bull are transparent and all of this,
And he throws it back to the parent company at that point as well, big parent company. And Christian Horner though is what, 3 or 4 team principals down,
away, yeah.
And he's looking down. I said this to you when I was watching this episode, that I don't know if McLaren and Zach are going to be too happy with how they're portrayed in that particular episode, because there was a anonymous email, and they stressed this, in fairness, in the episode, an anonymous email sent to all the team principals. What would you say there?
It was the cache of WhatsApp messages that were used as evidence in the investigation that was then anonymously sent out to every Formula One journalist, press outlet, media outlet rather, and every team principal in the sport.
Yes, and I think it might be Will Buxton who does the little voiceover for this. He's answering a question and he says, nobody knows who sent it out and it was anonymous, but the very next cutaway shot you get is of Zach in his office. And if that is not trying to tell you a story, nothing is.
I do vaguely recall Zach being suspected as being the one at the time. Whether, I can't remember now whether it was in actual like article form or whether it was just Twitter gossip. So do like, let's not be suggesting that it definitely was. When I rewatched that episode and I heard the cut, basically the scene that they cut to is Zach and another McLaren team member opening the email, and they're showing it to somebody else. So you can hear someone saying, oh, is that the email? And he's like, oh yeah, it is. And showing it to her. So I do think that, considering people, I think because he was the one that was most outspoken, that's why people automatically assumed that yes, it could have been him that leaked it. But with that knowledge and Netflix then cutting it that way, I was like, ooh, that's a little
spicy.
Yeah, a little. That was a little bit like, oh, what are you implying there, lads?
Yeah, it definitely did imply. And actually, we forgot to touch on what was definitely one of the first laugh out loud moments. And it came from Christian Horner after that Zach press conference. Go on, I'll let you deliver the line from Christian Horner.
Zach is such a prick.
So good. We don't even see his face. He's walking in with the press officer back into the Red Bull garage, and he just utters the words, and like it popped me. I properly howled out loud. I was like, yeah, okay, Christian.
Yeah, because I was a bit behind, and you would text me to be like, oh, I don't know if McLaren are going to like the editing in this, and that had just happened. So I was like, oh, that must be what he means.
Like, no, they're implying some other things here.
I think the way that they handled the Hornergate stuff was really interesting, because it was the first time that you actually see that the comms manager actually had gone into the room with Christian to ensure that Netflix weren't going to ask him anything that he couldn't respond to. But at the end, then Christian was just like, yeah, but like if they ask, I'm just not going to answer. And they went, because it's going to be the quickest way that we get through this, is just like, just know that like, don't push me if I say I can't answer that, because it's an ongoing investigation, which in fairness, yeah, like you don't, like when it's like a criminal investigation, you know that people can't talk about certain things because it's an ongoing investigation and yada yada yada. And it's the same with stuff like this. So Yeah, I just don't understand why people still try.
Well, yeah, but then you had
Because then you ruin it. Then you ruin the investigation.
But you had Jos Verstappen coming out in public saying, I think Christian Horner should go. And then Max being asked about that and him basically just saying, look, my dad's a lunatic. You know, he goes out and he says whatever he wants in the media is essentially what Max said.
Yeah.
It's probably one of the most open Max Verstappen has ever been in a press conference. I do have this opinion that I think Red Bull should have asked him to step aside for the investigation part anyway as a parent company. I was surprised that they didn't. I really was. And nothing in the actual Drive to Survive made me think anything otherwise. I still think they should have made him step aside because he was like, the season was on and he was there and he was at races and it was a bit awkward for everyone else involved. And like, if he had been found guilty of something, how do we know that there wasn't other people that work for Red Bull that feel the same way or possibly could have felt the same way? And having him around is not great for them. That's just something that I thought at the time. And looking at it there, I thought...
Yeah, and it's one of those kind of interesting things that it happened slightly before the season started. And it was like literally just before the car launch.
Yeah.
And I think that maybe at first they didn't think it was that bad. I don't know, because we don't know exactly what actually went on. So maybe they're like, this will just blow over. We'll do our investigation and be grand. I don't think they expected the absolute massive media storm because at the end of the day, like, Christian has been a very prominent figure in Drive to Survive and he's become a bit of a celebrity in his own right. Yeah. He's also married to a Spice Girl, which also brings its own publicity. And we were talking as well to say, like, Jerry appears a lot more in this throughout the entire season. And I think it was clearly a way of being like, she's standing by her man and like wanting to be like an active presence, but also not just from a photographs and during the season point of view, but also from like the Netflix, like reminding people, because it must be really difficult to relive all this stuff a year later.
100%,
because of the way that the series is.
But that was also a Red Bull strategy, and you see it in Drive to Survive. He comes into the paddock and he comes through the paddock gates, and Jerry Halliwell is with him. Jerry Halliwell Horner, is with him, and a poor kid wants his little hat signed, and Christian says maybe later because he knows what he needs to do. He needs to be seen. The two of them are holding hands together, and then you kind of saw Jerry Halliwell in like Miami and stuff, but then she was also on his phone a lot. He was video calling her a lot, and she was there pretty much in the entire... Anywhere you saw Christian Horner, even he was in the car and he was saying, oh, Netflix are here, by the way.
Well, and actually, like, you don't know whether they do communicate that much and they just never showed it before, but the fact that they made like a point of showing it this season, I think was very, very telling. But just going back to the whole like Jos Verstappen and Max Verstappen sort of thing, like, as much as like you knew that Jos was trying to kind of get Max out of there and Max was kind of making it clear that he was happy where he was kind of thing, I didn't realize that Jos had actively gone and was actually having conversations with Toto about Max driving for Mercedes.
Yeah, I thought that was just a rumor that was circulating.
Yeah.
Just like a kind of a fan rumor that were like, oh, maybe Max is going to drive for someone else that's not Red Bull. I was like, that's never going to happen. But actually, like, maybe it did get close. It sounds like it probably got closer than we all thought it did.
Yeah, and I don't think that was just created for drama. I think that, like, they wouldn't... Drive to Survive they've been called out for kind of creating scenarios that weren't really there before, and they have gotten better over the seasons because more and more people have been calling them out, including the drivers themselves. So I don't think they would have included that if there wasn't actual information to back it up. And Toto himself even said, is like, myself and Jos have been discussing it. So that to me was one of the biggest surprises. One of the other biggest surprises, I think, was... Can we also just say there was an episode called Carlos Sainz, Signs, about his journey to find a new driving seat. But like, Carlos Sainz, oh my god, it's the most genius pun I've ever heard.
It is the best name of an episode I have ever heard in my life for anything. Carlos Sainz, yes, and you're watching it now. Obviously, we know that he signed for Williams, right?
Yep.
I was still watching it, going, is he going to sign for Williams?
Yeah.
And poor James Vowles.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
So this is the bit that I was getting to, is that like that moment in the hotel room, which I love. Hang on, I'm going to try and find his turn of phrase. I wrote it down because it was so funny. You know, trying to sign a new driver is like dating. You know, it starts off with texts, then dinner, and then it ends up in a hotel room. And the entire room just like erupted in laughter. And he's just like, what? Like, it's true. And then it cuts back to him in the hotel room with the two contracts. And Carlos and Kako, his manager, just don't show up.
And it's so funny, like, because they have a couple of press people there, maybe social media people, lawyers, I don't know who was in the room, but waiting for him. Two contracts on a big boardroom desk. couple of pens, couple of glasses of water, and they bring in a bottle of champagne, pop it in the little champagne holder with the bucket and the ice and everything, and it looks like it's going to happen. And James is like, no, they're on the way. They're on the way. It's maybe, 5 minutes before, 5 to 8, and then the next shot you see the clock and it's 20 past 8, and they're like, they're slightly delayed. And then the media person, I think, gets the phone call to say that they're not coming, and then a brilliant close-up shot of them removing the champagne from the bucket, and like obviously the ice had kind of started to melt at this point, so it's just water in the bucket. It's just such a brilliant shot. Whoever on the Netflix crew zoomed in on that shot, it's stunning. It's the best bit of cinematography you'll see, because it's amazing.
It matches like them, because they show them putting it in and making it look all nice as well, and then it's just like that symbolizes, oh no, it's over. It's not happening. And then I think one of the best bits then comes when you hear why Carlos Sainz did not turn up, and you will deliver this line brilliantly, and you can gloat then as well. Flavio called me.
And you had predicted Flavio Briatore was going to be in this series of Drive to Survive, and oh my god, is he in this series?
Yes,
everywhere.
I was the minute I saw him in like the little end clip of the first episode of like, oh, here's what's to come this season, I was like, I cannot wait to get on the phone and tell Ciarán and just rub this in his face, because when you just have a feeling about something, because they're after losing a lot of big characters. Like Daniel Ricciardo will not be there next season. Gunter Steiner wasn't really in it this season because, of course, he also had gotten the sack from Haas.
They asked him at one point, do you care?
He was like, I didn't give a fuck. It's literally what he says. And they've now used that in their promo material for It's Drive to Survive week.
It's so funny. Oh, Gunter Steiner, I miss him.
Oh, we do. But Flavio has that kind of like blunt delivery thing that I think Gunther also has. So I think from a production standpoint, I can understand why they have him in. Yeah. But again, Will Buxton just coming in with the tea to be like, oh, some people say that he was like an F1 maverick and one of the greatest team principals of all time. And other people will tell you that he was a cheat. Yeah. A dirty cheat. Yeah. Which I just thought was very funny. And also like, even like now we know like Alpine's second driver, Jack Doohan, he comes along and he was just like, oh yeah, Carlos being the paddock slut. Oh my god, I howled at that. Like there's just some great one-liners this season overall.
Actually, the drivers are quite witty, and actually you didn't realise that how many people's careers were resting on where Carlos Sainz decided he was going to drive for. Yeah, because everybody wanted Carlos Sainz. You know, it was, I don't really know why Mercedes didn't actually try and approach Carlos Sainz, to be perfectly honest with you. Maybe they thought they were going to get Max Verstappen. Who knows at that point?
I think that might actually be it. They opted to try and steal Max away instead of enticing Carlos over.
And because like McLaren are set, their two drivers are young and they're doing quite well. So I was like, why isn't he going to Mercedes? You know, that was the question I had. The drivers are quite witty this season, and you get to see a bit more of their personalities actually as well. The younger drivers coming through, and a lot of those younger drivers are cocky, and you can see why they're young and why they're driving a Formula 1 car at such a young age.
Is this you leading into Liam Lawson?
Liam Lawson. Liam Lawson in this, you could call him Liam Max Lawson, because he reminds me of a young Max Verstappen. He is so cocky. He does it. One of my favourite bits actually is when they do this in-season test where they're going to let Liam Lawson drive the car, and they're like, okay, you're going to drive second, Max is going to drive the car first for a benchmark. And Max comes in, great, and literally you see Max Verstappen for maybe 20 seconds in this whole 3.5 minutes they've got with Liam Lawson. Max comes in, boom, does his lap, puts on his race suit, and then he's gone. Christian Horner says, hey, enjoy the weekend, Max, see you later. And then Liam gets in the car and he's like, hasn't driven any Formula 1 or racing car in like 7 months or something, I think he tells with Christian Horner. And Christian's like, oh, come out and let's see what you do. And the very first corner, Christian's sitting at the telemetry, and he's like, oh, what's happening? Like, how's he doing? And he's like, oh, he's not hanging back, is he? Like, and he's equaling Max's top speed and stuff. And then he was only like 0.2, I think, a lap slower by the end. And he's just so cocky. And then you realize, okay, right, we know what's going to happen here. Well, at that point, you think Ricciardo's going to get the Red Bull seat, Liam Lawson going to be driving for the junior team. Yep. That doesn't end up happening. I will ask you about Daniel Ricciardo in a couple of minutes, because he actually featured more heavily than I thought he was going to, and they put the checkered flag on his career in Drive to Survive as well.
They did.
But Liam Lawson then gets into a car and flips off Sergio Perez. after having a tangle with Sergio Perez, ripping the side pod out of Sergio Perez's car. And Claire Williams, who adds brilliantly to Drive to
I'm
Survive
so
this year.
happy that she's in it.
She's so good. She replaces Danica Patrick, who had a difficult time, I think, in season 6. Fair to say. Claire Williams just says you cannot, and she doesn't even, like, no airs of grace, she calls it out. You cannot have a junior team driver affecting the senior team's race car and driver like that. And I don't think Liam Lawson really understood what he had done wrong until he gets called into Christian Horner's office. Netflix are kicked out. Microphones are turned off. Christian confirms Liam Lawson's not wearing a microphone. They sit down and have what looked like a very difficult but necessary conversation.
Big time. And you and I talked about this before it was announced that Liam was going to be taking the Red Bull seat from Checo for the 2025 season, because we were remembering that moment of him just being so like aggressive, and like he clearly wanted that seat from Checo, but the way that he was not going to get it if he kept trying to run Checo off the road. Like that is not how you get the drive in Red Bull. Well, actually, hang on, clearly it was.
So this is the other thing. I think that probably did help him in the end. It's just they needed him to be a little bit more sensible if you're going to be a Red Bull driver. But I think Christian Horner probably went, oh, well, that's kind of what we need, isn't it? We need someone who's going to get their elbows out. Yeah,
and I think Checo had just, like they say it in the series, he'd so underperformed for at least this, like not even, like at the first couple of races, not too bad. And then he just like fell off a cliff.
There's one point where Christian Horner was talking to him in the back of the garage. I thought Checo was going to cry. He looks so sad. She's just like, oh, just go out there and, you know, do your best or whatever. And then he gets in the car and goes away. And Christian always has something to say after the driver leaves. That's kind of a trait he has. And he just says, just give him a good quality. If he gets a good quality, then he gets his confidence back. And you're kind of going, you don't say that to Checo, like, before he gets in the car. But that's not the way Christian does his business, apparently.
Well, maybe he does say those things. Maybe he'd already realised at that point that wasn't working. So he needs to try something different.
Do you get a sense from watching it, actually, that they just forgot about Checo? Did Christian give up on him? And then I was like, oh, well, that's it.
No, I think from watching this, I think it's just a case of there was so much to fit into 10 episodes that certain things just had to get axed. You know, Lando, I would actually say, was probably the primary character this season. Taking kind of over from Daniel Ricciardo, shall we say. Yeah. And I thought that even though they'd already given Daniel a lovely send-off at the end of season 5, they gave him another one now. But you could actually, it broke my heart. Yes, we're going on to Daniel now, sorry.
That's okay. You can move on to Daniel Ricciardo.
It just flowed nicely into it. It kind of broke my heart to see how defeated he was. And that there's a moment when they're kind of asking him, like, what is it that like you're feeling? And he's like, oh, I don't really want to say it out loud. And you can just see the emotion in him. Like he still clearly like has a lot of love for the sport, but just his drive just wasn't there, unfortunately. And I think he probably did go into that seat thinking that it was eventually an inevitability that he was going to get back into the Red Bull seat. I do think he has regrets over leaving Red Bull in the first place, because at the end of the day, he is the only teammate to have outdriven Max Verstappen.
And Will Buxton says, and calls it out very clearly, the biggest mistake of Daniel Ricciardo's career is leaving Red Bull. And I think that it cuts to like a couple of Renault crashes. Some horrible time in a yellow Renault car. I liked that we got him jumping again into the sea, like we did in the very first episode of season of Drive to Survive with Daniel Ricciardo. It was a nice way to end it. He just looked like a defeated man at the end. Yeah, you're going to miss him though.
Yeah, big time. But I do think they were kind of like lining up Lando and the likes of Leclerc, Gasly, Russell, Albon, especially by giving them kind of like their own little special episode.
Can we talk about the episode really quickly?
Yeah, we can.
So I was very excited at the start of that episode. I think it's called In the Heat of the Night, I think the name of that episode.
It focuses on the Singapore Grand Prix.
Actually, I was really surprised. You get to see their hotel rooms. They're kind of normal hotel rooms. I had kind of envisioned that their hotel rooms were big giant suites penthouses and stuff. And I was kind of like Lando Norris's room. Like he has his shoes and he has about 10 pairs of shoes lined up by the door. And you go, this room looks quite small and normal. And they're all, and like, I think it's, they show George Russell's hotel and it's the Ritz-Carlton Hotel. I mean, it's a nice hotel, but it's not like anything special. I was really surprised at that. I was like, oh wow. But the premise of this episode is they kick it off by giving them a phone from Netflix. Smartphone saying, film your behind the scenes stuff. And I thought we were going to get the entire episode or the majority of it like from the point of view of the phones. We got a good bit of like from the phones, but I didn't learn anything that I don't think we wouldn't have learned if Netflix weren't there any filming anyway. I was slightly disappointed. You get to see George Russell going swimming with his partner, but that's not filmed on the phone. Charles Leclerc seemed to only use his phone in one chair in the episode, in his apartment, his hotel room. He didn't seem to use the phone anywhere else. You get to see Lando and Max traveling together, actually, more than I thought they did.
And actually, we learned that Albon and Russell fly commercial.
Yes.
Compared to that, and then they Albon makes a joke about Russell being tight.
It's true. And actually, now, in fairness, I mean, they're flying commercial. It is not an economy seat they're in. They're in a business or first class seat, in fairness to them. But yeah, it was an interesting premise for an episode. Don't think it came off for me. I was left a little bit wanting.
Yeah, it was only afterwards that I went, oh, a lot of that was actually filmed, or it appeared to be filmed by Netflix themselves as opposed to on the phones. I did enjoy some of the little fun facts, especially like with the group of friends, like learning more, and they all like have like how they describe each other. So like Albon is the joker, Russell is the good hair, Leclerc is the handsome one, Lando is getting a reputation for being a playboy or party boy? I forget.
Party boy.
I forget which turn of phrase.
I think he was in a relationship at the start of Drive to Survive. Because what I think maybe the last episode, he clears the bathroom and he's like, "Oh, you can see too much stuff from my ex."
Can't forget that Pierre Gasly, what we learned is he's always late.
I was getting so angry at Pierre Gasly. Charles Leclerc is sitting in a restaurant with loads of people and he's like, "Oh, I'm coming, I'm in the car." I was like, "Oh my, how rude are you, Pierre Gasly?" Then he's late for Netflix.
In fairness, we all have a friend like that. We all have a friend who's always late. You need to tell them to arrive an hour beforehand, and then they might be on time or they might still be 15 minutes late.
I was getting so angry. I was like, "Pierre, come on, please. You're so rude." And actually, another interesting thing from that episode is they stay on European time because the race was so late. So they were getting up at like 2 o'clock in the day, and they have obviously blackout curtains in their small enough hotel rooms. They're very disappointed. I don't want to be a Formula One driver anymore. I thought you'd get really cool hotel rooms.
In fairness, they're probably barely in it over the course of the weekend. They're mostly down at the paddock.
Yeah, they are, to be fair. And they get down quite early. And actually, you really get a sense as well of how shy Lando Norris is. And he doesn't really like the cameras. There's one point where he doesn't want to get out of the car because there's loads of cameras. It's the walk from the car dropping him off through that gate that we all see. They pop their cards in and into the garage. He looks so nervous.
He said it was his least favourite part of the weekend. He and the others, I think, are being shifted into the focus of like these are going to be probably big characters moving forward. Leclerc as well, he got his own special episode for winning Monaco, which was a big deal because of course we had the Monaco curse for him, which he was just like, I don't believe in curses, but I have been very unfortunate. Lando no wins Norris, which I didn't even know was a nickname for him, but like that was harsh.
I
Poor
felt
thing.
for him actually.
Yeah,
he's quite sad about that. Can we just talk about Leclerc's very funny moment where he tries to pay for some shopping? So he's in a supermarket.
It's literally the opening of the episode, which is brilliant.
He's in a supermarket with his friend and he tries to pay for he buys like Coke and some Fanta or a drink. And like, that'll be enough for everybody. I was like, Charles, what party are you throwing here? Not a whole lot of stuff for people. Tries to pay and his transaction is declined, which is funny enough as it is.
Yeah.
Then the very next scene is him stepping out of a supercar Ferrari with his little plastic bag of drinks. It's like, oh, Lord.
It's so funny. And also the fact that he turns around and he goes, "Oh, insufficient funds." It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. But that episode I actually thought was really, really lovely. I loved actually seeing him interacting with his dog Leo, who I just think is the cutest little pupper in the world. Sorry, Roscoe Hamilton.
I was going to say, surely Roscoe Hamilton is up there.
Well, I think there's only really like 2 paddock dogs, really. Actually, I have to laugh. We've gone like this far in, so before we get to kind of like our overall opinions of the season, we haven't gotten into like the Lando and Max of it all.
Oh my God, and that's like episode 2 as well, isn't it?
But I think because there's so much else to talk about that was very surprising. There was only really one thing that I think surprised us about the Lando and Max stuff is actually just how nice Max was about Lando.
So you don't You don't get a sense of Max being nice in that actual episode about the two of them. It comes at the very end where Max has already won the world championship, and it's this really candid bit. That's probably what's great about Netflix being around all the time, is that you get that big brother mentality where you forget that they're there. So you just get these candid moments, and they're the best moments. So Lando and Max is a tiny little moment, and Max just kind of says, you know, Lando's like, oh, I'm going to get you next year or whatever. And Max like, I've told you I told you numerous times before that like that day will come for you. But it's a real, nearly like a big brother or best friend relationship. It's like, I told you, your time is going to come. Like, don't be worrying. Not the cocky, arrogant Max Verstappen that we see normally. And that was good. Now, in saying that, Max Verstappen never apologized, it seems, for the crash that Lando said that Max was not driving correctly at the start, and they were like bickering and they were fighting on the track, and then Lando Norris spun out, and that was a horrible kind of week for Lando, it seemed, whereas Max didn't seem to really care, and Lando thought that Max would have texted him or called him to apologize or at least talk about it. And that doesn't seem to have happened, because Lando comes back in the episode and says, no, like he's driving in Oxfordshire or whatever. And he's like, no, I haven't heard from Max.
And it's one of those things that I think the debate is still going on as to whether or not Max should have apologized. Like, it was definitely still something that, was it a driving incident? Was it Lando's fault? Was it Max's fault? Like, that's still kind of up in the air. So I think... Yes. Okay. From a official standpoint, shall we say, I know that all the Max haters out there are just like, it was definitely Max's fault. I honestly, it's like, even having rewatched the episode back, I'm still just like, honestly, I still would have probably said it was a driving incident.
I was more angry at Lando Norris than I was during the actual race. I was like, Lando, please.
And I think what this did was it gave us a bit more insight into what was actually going on in the cockpit for Lando, because he even explains it himself that Max was brought up in the sport very differently to how he was. Yep. Because Max had a racing driver to be like, as a father, guiding him kind of through this and kind of teaching him how to have this hungry mentality that's a bit more along the lines of like Michael Schumacher, who kind of like balls to the wall, just was like, you drive and you go for the overtake and you do this and you do that. You have to be aggressive in the sport. And it's true, like a lot of the most successful drivers in history of Formula One have been very aggressive behind the wheel. For Lando, who I think is a bit more, I don't want to say that he's a bit more sensitive, but I do think he kind of holds it a little bit more, takes it a bit more personally, shall we say.
He does.
As opposed to, in comparison to Max. So I think that like Max saying to him, he's like, I told you will be world champion, like eventually, like it will happen for you. I think that's something that Lando probably would have appreciated hearing more than an apology.
Yeah, there's a great bit actually where it's him, George, maybe Charles, I think Joe Granu was there maybe as well, and they're talking just before Brazil, right? So that's the race where essentially Max wraps up the championship. He goes from P17 to win the race.
Which it was probably the rare time that you actually gave him kudos.
It was unbelievable. And even watching it back, you're going, this lad is just
spectacular,
unbelievable. Simply lovely, to use Max Verstappen's phrase. But before that race, so obviously he had qualified on pole position, and literally because Max was 17, all the people, and even George Russell makes a comment, he's like, oh, you should give him the trophy now. I actually don't think that type of stuff helps Lando Norris, because then when something bad happens, and we got some of the radio messages during that Brazilian race of Lando's pit wall trying to calm Lando down and saying, forget about Max. There was obviously a lot more messages that we actually were aware of. There was so many. And the defeatist coming from Lando Norris when Max Verstappen is the lead of the race and he's like, oh, I knew it. You're going, oh, like you went into that race with the mentality of Max Verstappen is going to beat me. And I think that's not something Max Verstappen would ever think of. And the fact that he went, Brazil, forget about Zandvoort. Brazil is Max Verstappen's home race. He is incredible there, right? I think he's had the two best drives of his career ever in the rain in Brazil, right? It's absolutely incredible. That race was second to none. It'll be never forgotten. I will never forget that race because it was incredible.
That to me is up there with the Canadian Grand Prix with Jenson Button.
Yeah.
That was iconic.
Exactly. It is iconic. And look, he proved why he was the world champion.
He did.
4-time world champion. But yeah, I think Lando Norris, you've hit the nail on the head, takes things very, very personally. And he's just missing that tiny little bit of ruthlessness on the track sometimes, and not carelessness. You know, it's the ruthlessness I think somebody's missing about that.
Yeah, and I think we kind of got a little shot of him maybe trying to do that with the whole team orders thing with like swap back with Piastri, and he's just like, he has to catch me first, like all that type of stuff.
Tell him to drive faster.
Yeah, and I think, you know, Christian turning around and saying, he's just like, oh, I can tell you now, Max wouldn't have given that spot back. Like that was a team mistake, so Piastri should have taken it up with the team to be like, you guys lost me that race, as opposed to Lando did. And I was like, yeah, do you know what? That's a fair point, but I do still think that Lando could have been the team player, let Piastri by, and then just stayed right on his rear wing, and he could have made another overtake. There was enough laps left that if he had just done it in the first place, he could have had a chance later on in the race to overtake him.
Do you think they would have allowed them to race?
At that point, they were still letting them race.
Still, yeah.
And it was then only like after the Monza incident that, or at least it's depicted in Drive to Survive, that it was after the Monza incident that they were told, okay, no, we have a number 1 and number 2 now, which I was impressed that, because it never was made public that they had done that, because you and I have talked about this to be like, McLaren don't have a number 1, number 2 driver. And I was like, well, guess what? They do. They do.
And like, I love that we saw the meeting.
Yeah.
And poor, like, Lando Norris. No, like, I'm assuming he knew what was coming, right? Because he knows he's winning, and he's like, I'm going to be the number 1 driver. And he's sitting in the corner, and Piastri is sitting there and just has to take it. Like, he just has to sit there, and actually Zach doesn't deliver the news. I kind of like that. You get the team principal to deliver the news. I forget his name, forgive me. Because Zach is in like Miami at this point. What appears to be making the call. He's not at that race. He's in Miami, and he appears to be making the call, not even being there. Don't know why, but it makes for great television. Him in like this Miami penthouse making these calls, and then you get to see this brilliant little insight of the drivers meeting with the media representative as well. And they're all like, are we happy?
Happy? And it's like Lando just like kind of like he's looking down, but he like kind of looks under his eyes, almost like Princess Diana, like to be just like, are we okay, Oscar? Like he's like kind of like waiting for Oscar to respond before he says anything, because he knows that like of course he's going to be okay with it, but is Oscar going to be okay with it? And then it cuts to Oscar just being like, I'm still going to race.
Exactly. Can we talk about Lando Norris's breathing for a second? Because I know that sounds weird. It was one of my favorite moments of the whole series. It was when they were like, he was driving for the championship, and it was in Brazil, I think is where the audio came from, and it was an isolated audio of Lando Norris in the cockpit, and his breathing was just so heavy, but you could get the concentration from his breathing as well.
Just when you started mentioning like hearing people's breathing and things like that, my brain actually went to a different moment, which was George Russell after Singapore, whose body went into complete... Now, I had no idea this had happened. So again, another great reason for the Netflix series is that like, I had no idea that his whole body basically started shutting down, and like, yes, everybody was like booted out of the room, and all you then hear is him like struggling to breathe, and it's like, holy crap. Like he even says it himself, it's like, you do often kind of forget like just how much we put ourselves through in order to do this. We had seen bits of like people reacting to the Qatar Grand Prix that year, when it was just like so unbelievably hot that like Lance Stroll was like throwing himself in the window of an ambulance kind of thing to be like, I need help. I did not know that it happened last year with Russell. Seeing
Russell in that kind of ice bath is actually quite scary, and him walking down to the ice bath, he is saturated. Yeah. Absolutely saturated.
Do they say it was like 60 or 80 degrees Celsius in the car for him or something like that?
Very hot, and then his body temperature went up to 40.
Yeah.
Which is dangerous. Very dangerous.
Yeah. Well, look, without spoiling everything else that happens in the episode, so people can just listen to this podcast and not watch it, because we do think people should watch it overall. I think it's a good season.
If you're a Formula 1 fan, you need to watch it. If you want to get into the Formula 1 for the upcoming season, I recommend you watch it.
Big time.
Because you are introduced to the whole slew of new rookies that are coming to the sport as well. So good luck watching Turn 1 in Australia. It could be very interesting. I'm looking forward to that. But yeah, I liked this. And I said this to you, I think this is one of my favourite Drive to Survive series out of the 7. I think it's going to be hard to beat number 1 and 2 for me, but this was not bad. I enjoyed it.
What was your favorite moment for either good or bad reasons? Like, what was the moment that like was the biggest standout for you this season?
Let me think about that now before I answer that one.
Do you want me to give you mine while you think?
Give me yours first, because I have 2 and I don't know which one to pick.
So I also technically have 2.
Okay, go on.
So
you can give
my standout moment, I think, was getting that insight into the conversation between Sainz and Hamilton at that press conference, because again, like I said earlier, nobody clocked any of that, but the fact that they were mic'd up for Netflix, we got it. And I just thought it was such a brilliant insight into the politics of the sport and how the whole like driver puzzle, the puzzle pieces were being sort of scattered about, and how all the team principals were trying to put them back together again and all that. I just thought that was a really standout moment, especially to start the season on as well. It's in the first episode. I also just loved seeing James Voles more. JV, or as Christian Horner called him, the Reverend Father, or Father Reverend Christian James Voles. I just thought that, like, once he said it, I was like, damn, I can't unsee it now.
He does a little impression then, doesn't he?
He does, yeah. And like with that dating analogy with trying to seduce drivers, again, James was he was a standout for me this season. I really enjoyed whenever he was coming up on the screen. I was just like, oh, what's he gonna do now? Like, I like seeing more from him, and so hopefully we'll get to see more of that in season 8 as well.
My favorite part of it was seeing the behind the scenes of Carlos Sainz is move from Ferrari to finding a new team. Very much is the driver's choice, especially when it's someone as good as Carlos Sainz.
Yeah.
And then he has a very small team. He would appear like the guy is his cousin as well.
Yep.
Looks like him. Looks like him, to be fair.
Also called Carlos.
Yes, well, I'm sure there's many Carloses in the Sainz family. But that insight, and then just the sheer fact that we got to see it looking like it was done for Williams, and then it wasn't done. That was a shock for me. I loved that insight that we got. And I do enjoy watching the mechanics react to the race when we can hear the mechanics.
Yeah.
Because actually, I understand that they work for the team, right? They are fans just like us. There's one point where one of the mechanics is like, I actually just can't watch. And you're like, yes, I understand you.
I'm so glad that it's back. It's a great way to kind of get into the excitement of the upcoming season as well, because it does bring you right up to the end of last season, and then in reality then we go straight into 2025 with Australia. So
the season hasn't even happened yet for 2025. I'm excited for Drive to Survive 2026.
Yeah, it could be season 8 could be very interesting, especially with so many moving parts. As you said, there's a lot of new drivers. Most of them we got introduced to, some of them we didn't. Like, we didn't get introduced to Bortoletto. We didn't get introduced to... We did get a bit of Ollie Berman, didn't we?
We did get a bit of Ollie Berman, yeah.
Kimi Antonelli, oh my god, that kid is adorable.
Kid, exactly. Oh,
he is a kid, yeah.
He's so small.
I just love the moment when they're trying to make them laugh. They're like, where's Lewis? And everybody laughs. And then Kimmy's like, I don't... Like, what's the story behind that? And it's like, because Lewis isn't here. Oh yeah, okay, I get it now. And then it's like, oh, the British humour, you'll get used to it.
We get the polished bit of Drive to Survive when you get the close-up of them sitting, in the seats, in the spotlights. But I like the fact that they run the camera straight away, and you get all these small little tidbits before they get into the real interview. They're filling out the slate card, or you get that bit with the media man and Christian Horner. So I'm assuming they all know, look, as soon as you go into that room, mics are live, cameras are live.
Even George Russell being like, please don't show my feet. And I was just like, he's in flip-flops. Oh my
Twice,
God,
twice.
I'm offended by the
Twice.
flip-flops.
I highly recommend you watch Drive to Survive Season 7, streaming on Netflix.
March 7th.
I cannot wait to see what they bring to us in Season 8 of Drive to Survive next year.
Well, I can't wait to see what the drivers bring for the 2025 season, which of course kicks off March 15th and 16th. Australia.
Yeah, Melbourne,
opening with Australia once again. Oh, very exciting. As you said earlier, what's going to happen into that first corner with 6 rookies is going to be very entertaining. Testing has been very interesting. Carlos Sainz actually topped the timings overall. Now, whether that'll carry through to what actually happens on the track remains to be seen. Lots of rumours going around that Red Bull are kind of keeping their cards to their chest, but also struggling a little bit. Apparently Ferrari have a lot more to give, but that's only coming from Leclerc as opposed to Hamilton. So
Red Bull are being like a typical Kerry man on the week of the All-Ireland, where they're like, no, we don't have a chance. And then they go out and they win by 8 points. I guarantee you, Max Verstappen, Liam Lawson are qualifying quite high on this grid, and if not, winning and or finishing on the podium, both of them in Melbourne. I can guarantee you that. Red Bull are always at this.
I also love how you're predicting Red Bull to be doing very, very well. Like, I just want everybody to note that it was Ciarán saying that, not me. So yes, what we're going to do is we're going to try and squeeze in a little bonus to go over. Actually, I'm just going to also say Rory Cashin is the one that used to always do the bonus on the big review ski, and I've just totally stolen that from him.
That's
So
gimmick
before
infringement.
before he ats me to be just like, how dare you, Rory? All credit, you used to do it. I've stolen it. But yes, we're going to try and do a little bonus episode of a little preview before Australia. Hopefully you've enjoyed our little review of the upcoming season of Drive to Survive. Yeah, thanks, Ciarán.
Thanks, Olivia.